Hey everybody, how you doing? Okay. As always, I'm going to stall for a minute or two as everyone kind of jumps in. It's so funny, so many people log in right at the last minute. I always give them a chance to do. All right, let's jump in and get rolling either way. First off, as always, can you hear and see me? I already have some positive responses, so thank you everybody for. It's funny, everybody knows the system now, right? Just letting you know that the presentation you can download in the polls section of the little UI on the right-hand side. Okay, to start out with today, so something interesting about today, I actually did, as most of you probably know, a testing protocol webinar. I think it's about 4 weeks now, right? I really just want to build on top of this one. I really meant it more as a little Q&A because I see a couple of trends building in feedback. So I'm going to move a little faster in some ways and maybe a little slower in others. So please feel free to ask your questions as we go. I really see this more as a workshop. Last presentation, more answering your questions. Now I'm going to tackle the poll questions. So just know that's what's going to drive the presentation. So feel free to ask as we go. Okay, one of the things I want to make sure I'm putting back into my presentations is when we're presenting stuff, this is my opinion. Meaning, one of the things I really just kind of refocused on in the last week or two, just based on questions that I get from the users and from the groups and stuff, it really is about software. We didn't design WKO5 to tell you how to train. We designed it to give you actionable intelligence. It's kind of down here in the corner if you could see it. And it really was that. That was our driving mantra from the beginning. We want the software to maybe help identify the things you should know, lead you into discovery about your own performance or your athlete's performance, maybe make you question and analyze some things, and really also to remove your own personal bias by forcing and looking at data analytics, bringing these things to the surface. So one of the mantras I'm going to get back on preaching a little bit, which I always feel bad about, but I think it helps, is I want people to understand, I'm not saying do it like me. I'm not saying there is one answer. What I'm really doing is, hopefully giving you some good education and understanding, showing you my process or sharing some of the things I do. I don't share them all, to be fair, but I usually give a pretty fair deep dive. And then hopefully that helps you shape your own. All right, based on those two, let's jump right in. Wow, so that we're full. Okay, so the webinar's full. Sorry for those who don't get in. What I did today, or for this presentation, is this is the poll right out of the Facebook group. I actually have two because I didn't have enough space in one screen, but for this one, I'm using the top one. And it really, the first question I want to address is this one. And sorry if I use names, I probably should have asked, but if you have a problem with that, forever hold your peace. So can testing to perfect model ever detract from training to achieve goals? It literally was my observation of that occurring more and more, watching it in the Facebook group, that prompted me to do this little add-on workshop to the idea of maintaining your power duration model. I think I see people, and this is always tough, right? When we learn new techniques and we change and evolve our knowledge, I wish, and I can tell you in my lifelong journey of learning, every time I read something once or tried it once, it all worked great, right? I have this little statement within our own company, do everything at least twice before you judge it or say you understand it. So, when it kind of comes to looking at all this stuff and understanding it, I think it's important because some of my initial communications, I think, have focused people on over pursuing the accuracy of the model, where what I want you to do is actually reduce the burden of testing, do so in a smarter way that delivers more useful and relevant information. And that's my idea of Goldilocks. It's not too little, not too much, right? And that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to put that context. I'm going to show you a little further expansion of the process. I'm going to try to give you some visual models to help you with that. So that's the purpose. All right. Now, the next group of questions was these top three. And this idea here is, how do we maintain the model? So let's just go to these slides. I presented these same slides. If you were in the last protocol session on testing, if you want to take a nap, now's a great time. Basically, if we look at a clean power duration curve, this red line is your power duration curve, and the yellow line is your actual mean maximal power. Often you can just visually see when they're reasonably close, and you can often see some time periods of oddities. We do, though, give you a chart, a tool to measure the accuracy of your power duration chart by doing a sum of squares and looking, and we can give you at Pmax, FRC, MFTP, the metrics that it spits out, a plus or minus, or what percentage is it off. And pretty much, like I will tell you, if you have some really weird data and the model sees any one of these close to 5% off, it won't even calculate. So it's also part of a check. We don't want to give you a bad model, but we do give you, based on the nature of your actual mean maximal power, accuracy plus minus and percentages. So that's always a pretty cool place to start and say, well, wow, is my model fitting pretty well? And what could be the plus minus of the numbers I'm seeing? Which I think is really cool, right? There's been some people talking about models and other things and whatever. No other software literally gives you the system to test their own model. We do, because we believe. Okay, now when it comes down to controlling or maintaining the model, it really comes down to the fact that you need to feed it. If you choose not to feed the model does not it does not predict what you can do, because it's not just going to take some data and say, wow, if this person trained and really went hard, they could do that. It's taking what you've actually done and it estimates a much broader range of what you can do. And it takes those estimates and it gives us some pretty good physiological metrics, training targets, and analytics. So we're using that to enhance your knowledge of the athlete. You remember my slide, you're using the performing athlete's information to learn about their physiology, and then you're using their physiology to better coach that athlete. To maintain this model, we need an accurate range of performance data. That means you really need at least 30 days, preferably out to 90 days of data, of which contain a maximum short, let's call it 1 to 10 seconds. Medium, let's call it 11 seconds to 3 minutes. I don't think I've ever seen it as short as 11 seconds, but we'll keep them continuous. And some long range of data, probably ranging, to be fair, from 20 to 60 minutes. And if you have a maximal effort in those range, within a 90-day range, you're in pretty good shape. Now, that leads us to protocol. How do I know and how do I maintain that model? And really the twist I want to add for this workshop, this session, is how do you do so with the least possible effort? How are you doing in a way that you don't have this constant maximal burden on your athlete? Well, I have a recommended system. This hasn't changed from the last presentation and I use it religiously. So when I start a season, or maybe after an extended time period off, let's say 3 to 5 weeks, I always start with a structured testing format, which I call baseline or initial structured testing. I'm going to go over that in the next slide. So I always start because I want to be able to utilize a clean start. Now, once you complete the baseline structured testing, you can use time ranges of less than 90 days for calculating your model, your power duration curve, and the resulting metrics, because you can be sure you have a short, medium, and long in your data set. That's one of the things that's gotten mistaken and has thrown people off. So understand, I don't know if this is a chicken or the egg thing, right? I guess it's for you, the coach or the athlete, to make that assumption. But right in the absence of that baseline where you know all the testing, each range of testing I'm about to show you has happened in a tight time range, you really don't know if you're carrying data over from before that last 4 to 6 week break, right? Or from your off season. So by starting from the baseline, you're ensuring that you can use the short-term data for your power duration curve and the resulting targets. If you do the baseline test to restart the season, so to speak, right? You don't have a baseline start point. So therefore, you're doing a little more guessing and estimating. Then I moved to a system of unstructured, which I'm going to explain again here today, but I'm also going to try to time it out. I put like a little 20-week schedule together, and I'm going to show you ways it can play out. The main thing you want to do is avoid garbage in and garbage out. The number of people who post like my DFRC went negative or my FTP is higher, but then they've got really wacky MMP data and stuff like that, that happens. You don't need a ton of perfect data, but there are a couple of elements to avoid, and I've got that question in here coming. So let's kick off with this idea of the structured baseline testing. I suggest a simple 5-day protocol. I run it with a day off, so one of the 5 days is day off. Why 5 days? Because to properly seed the model, you need maximum efforts. Now, I know there's some profiling testing protocols and other things that are out there in the world, and if that's the way you want to set your training levels, like classic, Coggin levels, there are protocols that you can do all the testing in 1 day or maybe even 2 days, but that will not give you the best power duration model because the athlete will carry fatigue from one test to another, from one test into the next. Our system is based off of maximal performance, so we spread it out over a couple of days to give the athlete time to recover. We don't use some surprising new time ranges. Day 1 is 5-minute, right? So, okay, you get your 5-minute. Day 2 is somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes. And here's how I recommend you doing it, right? If you're a TT, an athlete who your phenotype is a TT, or a very steady state, you don't have a big sprint number, you can diesel along for a while, you're the one who actually does not have to test as long because your threshold will come out of that time range. Because you're not getting a lot of anaerobic contribution to that energy. You go aerobic and stay aerobic at a pretty steady level. You don't have a big anaerobic battery. It's not contributing to the effort. But sprinters and pursuiters who do get contribution from the anaerobic side, we want to burn that off in the effort. We want to make sure that you're not over testing because of a higher anaerobic energy in this time range, higher anaerobic energy contribution. So if you know the athlete's historical phenotype, time trialers at 20 minutes, sprinters at 25, pursuiters who have the highest, tend to have the highest anaerobic capacity, 30 minutes, right? I don't think you need longer than 30 minutes in any test in the power duration model, unless for some reason you're chasing a normalized residual because it's really bad. Let's talk about that in a moment. Day 3 is 1 minute, day 4 is rest, day 5 is hit a couple of sprints. Bam, done. So Dave, great question. Do these tests eliminate the ability to, do you need to do FTP testing? I would say yes, right? And I've answered this question. That's actually a great question. Thank you for asking that. So I would say yes, right? You guys, as a coach, my opinion, I don't use FTP that much, except for a setting that gives me a good constant value of TSS. I am coaching by the curve, the whole athlete, and an individualized targeting system of eye levels, optimized interval guidance, and some of my own tricks of the trade, right? Which I've kind of showed you guys, my curve under the curve thinking. So I kind of use all those three in combination. So FTP doesn't have a high value for me as far as doing a specific FTP test. I don't feel the need to break it out because I get a good modeled FTP anyway by following this protocol, and I get all the other metrics accurate. 2, and here's another great question. So keep them coming, guys. And this is why I want it to be a workshop. I don't know if people are like, crap, I don't want to sit here with this guy all day, but ask him if you got him. Somebody's talking about doing 150-meter sprints, seated or standing. Every test is however you make maximal power. I don't care. Uphill, downhill, seat, stand, pedal with your hands if you're faster. Make maximal power. I see a lot of this going on too. Like I make more power when I stand and when I sit. we're measuring muscular metabolic response right here. This is a muscular metabolic system, FTP, TSS, all those things, right? We want maximal. If you can't make the same power due to some biomechanical restraint, some environmental restraint, that is what it is, you know, but we want max. So however you feel you can make max, make max. Would I do a lactate test during this week? So I'll answer that question. I wouldn't do it during this week. Let me tackle that one better. I would not do it during this week because you're just going to muddy some waters potentially a little bit, and lactate testing, because of the specificity, sitting on a train, all those things can be difficult. Or you could do repeats, or there's different ways to do it. So I would not. I might do it as a different point. For all the professional athletes that I work with and stuff like that, I've done a limited amount of lactate testing. I used to do it a lot. I don't do it as much anymore. That's probably a whole nother topic to get into, but I'll just honestly say I've found more success ensuring that there's no secret in lactate. Like I coach Rebecca Rush. She's a lactate freak, right? And she's been tested numerous times by Red Bull. Once that's identified, it doesn't really change, right? She just does a really good job of dealing with lactate over time. So once I understand the baseline, I'm more apt to be, my focus is more functional. I want easy to execute, more rapid pulses of data. Think about what I'm saying, more rapid pulses of usable data, more rapid pulses of actionable intelligence for me. One other question about the adapted FTP test by Coley. No, I would not do that either here. Now, if you want to do an FTP test because you're testing specifically, or you want to use the classic system, Coley's answer is really good, really good. One of the better answers I've seen in a long time. So guys, this goes to opinion, right? Coaching is an art, and I'm giving my opinion in my art. You might say, you know what, I want to do this testing and do lactate because it gives you a series of information that makes you smarter. It gives you more actionable intelligence. That's great. Follow your gut, learn, measure the results, and decide on your protocol, your systems, right? So be careful what I'm saying. I'm not saying don't do it. The question that's being asked is, do you do it, Tim? And I'm answering whether I do it. Baseline testing for multi-sports, Sebastian, that's a great question. We're doing some stuff in that realm. We're working with Steve Palladino, and I would say look soon downstream for some new ideas there, because it's challenging, right? Now for a multi-sport athlete, I would test them in the same 7 to 10 day range, right? But we're thinking through some ways to do that more intelligently. All right, excellent. I think I got through all the questions on these slides. Good questions, you guys. Going on to the next slide. So this is my baseline testing. I do this in 1 week period, like I'm obviously by day 1, day 2. I mean, these are succession, you know, they're in succession, they're done 5 days in a 7-day week. Every once in a while, and it's not a killer. Let's say the athlete's work schedule has to put an extra day here or an extra day here, that's fine. You're going for max anyway. As long as it's, you know, within a calendar week, you're in a good spot. The trick is don't mix them like the old testing protocol. When you do this initial, just some extra tips, always at the start of the season. Like I do it in the last transitional week in a season. And if my athlete takes, for some reason in the summer, 3 to 5 weeks off, I'll redo it. The reason, and the only reason an athlete typically take that much time off in the summer, injury, right? So it's really important, or maybe personal or whatever, but you get my point. It's usually a reason you want to test anyway, coming back from. But always best to do, when you do your baseline testing, here's a coaching trick, and I do this with all my athletes. They know that baseline testing is always happening in the same 2-week range, meaning it's always the beginning of November. We're doing baseline tests somewhere between November 1 and Thanksgiving, right? They know it's going to fall, because every year that lets me compare my athlete's starting point and gives me better understanding of the work we have to do before I write their annual training strategy. Now note, I didn't say plan, and I'm going to come back to that. Then we go to the idea, all right, so now we have baseline. Let's go into ongoing testing. And again, feel free to ask questions as we go. So now we have our baseline test, right? We're started out great. We've done our maximal efforts. Our model is robust and good. It's telling us about our athletes' underlying physiology. We're using that underlying physiology to develop a training strategy, and the athlete starts training, right? You apply a long-term dose that results in daily stimuli that you have some expectation of response, right? And they go down that range and they're going. Well, in the absence of any testing at all, whether you did old school FTP testing, a 20-minute test or whatever, you really have no measurement to see how your strategy is going. And when I say that, when you have no measurement to see how your strategy is going, most people go, well, no duh, Tim. But what people I think I see misunderstanding is the idea of having the ability to use a model and a model-based testing in an unstructured format. And unstructured, I think the mistake I made was calling it unstructured. There is some structure to the timing, right? It's the length of the test, and it's how it's you don't formally test like every 4 weeks like the baseline. You don't have the athlete all jacked up and nervous and they're sweating in their bed the night before, like, oh crap, I have to do that test. I'm going to fail. I'm going to succeed. What I meant by more unstructured is it's easier to implement. You could do it a little more ad hoc. But as a coach using it as an art form, you do actually have some structure. You have some timing and some desire, because the reality is what you're really trying to get at it is you're measuring the success of your dose and stimuli. The faster you can collect data on the effects of dose and stimuli, and then use your knowledge to appropriately tweak your training strategy, will bring you better results come peak time. That really probably is the art and the magic. The data doesn't say, whoa, coach, we need to do a whole lot more of this. Actually, it sort of does. It might say, you're losing some physiological something's changing. It will give you insight, though, into tweaking or edits that are needed within the performance. As you maintain that model, right, and in the training response and or the training dose and stimuli leading to response. As you maintain the model, the data you're basing those decisions on is robust. And that is so crucial in decision making. Remember, it's not data science, it's decision science. Good use of data in training increases the odds, improves the odds of you making good decisions in your training. You don't train, with power. You're training by power. You're not using it just to say, I want to go 432 watts for 90 seconds. It's something that you really are using for understanding what's happening and changing in the engine itself, so you make better training decisions. Not that there isn't a role for targeting and everything else, don't get me wrong. All right, let me get off that platform. When it comes to ongoing testing, we're always using normalized residuals and testing targets. I'm going to show samples, of course, in a minute for those who are newer and might not know. We're simply targeting, don't overthink it. A short, medium, and long ranges. And I like to keep the tests in 30 to 60 days. 90 days might be a little too long because something might be changing within there that you lose track of. And I'm going to give some insights of putting that in the schedule and a couple of tips on picking your pace or selecting a pace of testing. And what I like, and the reason I originally called this unstructured, which I'm coming to regret a little, is it simply can be blended into a workout. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Now, timing tips. We want to time this into your training cycle. You might want to do like week 1, week 2, week 3. That's how you make your short, medium, long. I'm actually going to show you how I time mine. You want to roll, it always wants to be rolling, it should say really, rolling things forward, and not hitting new peaks should be reviewed. And what I mean by that, right, is if the athlete goes and they start doing testing and they're not peaking, that also should garner you looking at it more and trying to decide why that could have occurred. So let's say they've worked hard for 4 weeks and they do their short, medium, long test and numbers don't get better, right? That also should be thought about. That won't necessarily change the model, right? But it gives you insight. That's why, this idea of looking not just at the model results, but the tests themselves are important. So let's start off with what normalized residuals. If you look in your power duration model and your basic or advanced views, power duration model dashboard, you have a normalized residual chart, looks like this, not the big red arrows, looks like this. And then right below you have a short, medium, and long. So what normalized residuals is, mathematically speaking, it's a very simple way of showing distance from zero, distance from some like standard deviations away from some 0 point. So imagine this red line is your power duration curve, which we know is a sigmoidal shape. It's like that S shape, right? But if we've pulled it flat and then measured your mean max power and made each second a blue dot, here each blue dot represents whether the mean max power is below or above that power duration curve, right? And those points are residuals. So when you see like here in my arrows, those are bad arrows, right? They're kind of in the way. I guess you can see it best here. When you see the normalized residual areas drop below the power duration curve, the lowest points of that drop are your test targets. So it literally gives you your test durations. So this athlete, if I was to test them today, I would do a 20-second, it's 30 seconds actually. Well, I might as well say it. Down here, you actually see the time ranges of the lowest, short, medium, long, right? And it tells you a target to attempt to exceed. This gets confusing at times. This says 689 watts. Man, my eyes are getting bad. I can't see it. I don't know if you guys can. I think it says 689. So this tells me in my 30-second test, my goal is to try to exceed, not achieve, exceed 689 watts, because that will pull this blue dotty section up to the power duration curve or above. Same with medium, 133, and the long is 27 minutes happening out here. Now, what I have here is what I call the 5 to 10 rule. You will see, I don't worry about any residual unless it goes over 5. And what I can tell you is once they get close to 10, that's where they could make your model a little weird. When you do see one close to 10, you're like, I should probably clean that up. Because what that's telling this athlete, right, really just hasn't gone hard in the 22 to maybe 30-minute range, right? If you kind of just squared it out here. So they have like an 8-minute hole where they just, for some reason, it could be just the way they ride. It could be they have an 18-minute hard hill by their house, right? And then the only time they're going hard for that 18 minutes, they climb the hill and then they always roll down the other side. So they don't end up with a max 25-minute test. So, but it starts to throw off your model the closer you get to 10 standard deviations away. Now be careful of overreacting to that. That's the whole point I'm gonna make. I'm gonna time that out and show you some points. But when I do see them like that, when they get to 10, that might be the one and only time I get off my normal testing schedule and say, hey, athlete, I think we should clean that up. It really depends. If it's first cycle of base and I really don't care that much because my athlete's riding base a lot, I might not bother. And again, this goes back to, it just helps you make better decisions, right? It's not the decision. If I'm just about to start a really important peak phase and I really want sharp targets for that peak phase, well, yeah, then I'm going to want to clean it up. So I'm using the data, not only just being able to quantify it and visualize it, but I'm also using it to make better decisions of the training strategy and the impact of my training strategy on the athlete. So I think I answered all questions on that specific topic, Jeff. Okay, so when it comes to doing these unstructured tests, I always blend them into workouts. So short sprints, that's one's always easy. I mean, right? You just get warmed up, knock out your couple of maximal sprints, roll on, do your day, go for your long ride. It's actually a great thing to do on an easier endurance day, right? So you bang out some hard sprints, you engage some muscle, you make a little extra muscular demand, and then you just kind of roll out, get some good endurance working. Medium days, most of the medium, if you notice, really probably, let's call it around the 1 minute-ish range. So you're not going super long and hard, but those tend to go pretty deep. I mean, you definitely dump the whole anaerobic side, right? And they, around 35, 40 seconds, they really start hurting. So they can be mentally tough and physically tough. But that's why I like to do these. And I think this gets missed a lot. Again, do it on an easier day. if you're doing a hard interval set, you don't want to start out with a maximal 1 minute test, right? You want to go out and bang that out. If the athlete's not training too hard, you could do your short and medium. Let's say they're training 10 hours a week and not like riding hard group rides 5 days a week to get that. And you have a legitimate rest day, even banging one of these tests out in a rest day is not that horrible. Depends when and where. You don't want too much strain. You get my point. But so there's ways to interpret it, right? I don't do that right now. Most of my athletes are kind of in that 20 to 22 hour a week range. So, rest days are super important to be rest. But if for me, I would do it. I train 8 to 10 hours a week, sometimes more, depending on how much time I have to spend on the trainer. So I might do it that way because I'm not that tired. I ain't training that hard, but there's flexibility for you to interpret. So you just knock off early. If you can do it in an interval, like let's say by just chance you're doing a set of 45 seconds and your medium is 47 seconds, yeah, you can knock it off as the first interval, take a little extra recovery, then finish the set. Now, long efforts make the core of the workout. One of the things I preached heavily in the old days, I just got away from, and I'm going to get back to because it got mixed up. Everybody's progressing back to this 20-minute test. The models does a really good job of, even if you go a little over 20, it gives you a pretty good number, and that's good enough, right? The absolute best thing you can do from a modeling sense, and in my opinion, from your athlete benefit sense, pretty much throughout the year, with some periodization, let's call it, to be considered. There's nothing like a maximal 30 to even 60-minute max. Now you don't need to go 60, but 30 to 45 is a sweet spot. Go out and do we've gotten so everything has to be an interval. We forget how hard and potentially how effective just going full on, right, for 40 minutes, freaking hard. And it's super a threshold. You tend to be at 40 minutes, maybe a little over threshold. But the reality is we've gotten away from that in workouts. So I see it more and more when people say, well, that test is 35 minutes because the normalized residual looks, maybe it's a little further out here. And people are like, wow, that's like so long. I will tell you what, if you're a performing athlete, and this is my honest statement, I've offended people with this before, so I'm going to take the opportunity to offend somebody again. If you're a performing athlete and you can't ride your bike as hard as you can for 45 minutes more than one race a year, you will never be great. This is what it is. I would never take on that athlete as a coach because you know what? All training is both physiological and psychological in nature. If you as the coach are letting your athlete off the hook and always doing 4 times 10 instead of giving them some of those longer ones at threshold, when it comes time for them to suffer in a race, they're not going to be mentally ready. Athletes who suffer well have a common trait. It simply is more norm. They've learned to tolerate it better because it's just a state that they're more used to. Think about that. Okay, so that's how I would do the short, medium, long. So now let's talk about how I would schedule this. One of the hardest parts is like, man, I want to hire like a graphic design person who, when I'm like, I have this idea, I want to show everybody how to think about things over time. Figuring out how to show it to you is like one of the hardest parts. So it's like I could sit here and think about like 100 ways. It takes me a day. So I'm just going to put this on a simple grid, right? But maybe oversimplifying it, I want to put out like, different caveats. Please feel free to ask as many questions about the next couple of slides as you want, because I'm afraid I'm going to miscommunicate the idea because of the visual. I can do a pretty good job of explaining it usually, but sometimes the visual hurts. Sometimes it helps. So all I'm doing here is looking at the first 8 weeks of a season, and then I'm actually going to look at the next 8 weeks. So I'm going to talk about what I use the term macro cycle because of all of this as a whole, but really I'm taking weeks, like a transition week, base week 1, base week 2, base week 3, then some rest, right? That's pretty much what we see in ATP and other ways of looking at it. Then I'm talking about, I've broken the tests into 4 areas: a full test, and that's the baseline. Should have used the same language. See what I mean? I'm not as good at it as I think, right? You could take a note that he means baseline test, right? And then your short, medium, long. And then there's some key testing points I want to talk about. So hopefully you're with me. And then across here, we're going weeks. We've got, imagine the first 8 weeks, really 9 weeks of the schedule are laid out. So I do the last week of transition as test week, and then I go base 1, 2, 3 into rest. Typically, if the athlete's done a good job of off season and resting, and you're starting base at the right training intensity and load, they can easily do a 4-week block before they take some time off, maybe even a 5-week block before they take some time off. Don't get me wrong, if for some reason, like you're a track cyclist or you're just hurrying up to get ready for cyclocross season, that intensity might break that, what I just said. So remember, everything, I'm giving you generalized answers, but you usually do pretty well with that. So I start out with the full test. Once we have the full test in place, right, we're pretty good for a while. One of the things I've come to a realization in my own coaching workflow is I do want to test within every 8 weeks. I want my short, medium, long, because my baseline's in place. I probably won't do it again unless we have a long summer break. I want to be testing within the parameters of 8 weeks. Now remember, it's 90 days to maintain the model. 8 weeks is about half of that, right? But here, for those of you who know kind of the general physiology and even what's behind the PMC, most athletes fully adapt to exercise in 4 to 8 weeks. That's pretty much typical. Now there's some rapid, responders who, particularly when rapid responders are in very good shape, they'll adapt to like peak exercise or high intensity exercise in 2 weeks maybe. But the reality is you can usually count on exercise adaptation to be like a rolling 4 to 8 weeks. The work I'm doing today, I'm really benefiting the most from about 4 to 8 weeks from today. So what I do is I think about my testing in an every 8-week basis, but in a rolling, that's what I meant by rolling, 4-week format. And the way I typically split my testing is I'll do my short and medium, in one general time range, and then my long in the other. So again, please feel free to ask questions if I'm not making it clear. So let's take that over time. So this is Joe Ryder, right? Joe Ryder rolls on, season's coming up. They've got a big goal. They want to win national championship. Great, here we go. We do the baseline testing. We learn about that athlete. We move into training. We train through base 1, base 2, base 3. Now we're taking a little short rest week. I rest them, and guys, I'm just giving a generalized point here. We rest Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, heck, maybe even Thursday. Probably not off that simple of a base, but maybe it depends how much they're training and what kind of fitness they're in and blah, blah, blah. We get back at it a day or two, Thursday, Friday, maybe Friday, Saturday. Then we knock out just enough to get rolling, right? And while they're super fresh, they're just coming off that rest, we're gonna knock out that short test, right? Because your sprint is gonna be the best when you're freshest. Most people, generalization, some people might need some load. Most of us are best when we're fresh. And that's gonna give me a good maximal sprint, right? Then I'm gonna repeat that format, meaning if I'm always doing that sprint test on the Saturday, Sunday of the rest week, I'm gonna repeat that every 8 weeks because that gives me a good time frame. The athlete knows when it's coming. I know I have generally the same parameters of the test. What do I mean parameters? I know they've had some rest. If I took a sprint test, right, and this cycle did it after 3 or 4 days of rest, but then next cycle did it in the last day of the 3rd week of a big build, that athlete's going to perform different, right? The test is going to be different. So this is where I think I chose the wrong name to say unstructured. I have some structure in the timing, but I'm blending that. I might say, hey, athlete Joe, just, warm up pretty well and then knock out those 3 sprints for me, then go ride 3 or 4 hours. So the reality is I test them. Then once they get into a little bit of training, and this typically to me is the CTL is ticking back upwards. It's on the upward trend for 1 to 3 days. 1 to 3 days. And it really depends on the athlete because a lot of athletes struggle to give a full-on medium without a little bit of load in their legs. The reality is then I'll do, and that's early in this first week, it might be the Tuesday or Wednesday and the first week of the 2nd cycle or in base 5 in this situation. I just squeak that in. Even when I'm doing base training this early, and even by the time we're only talking about base 5, I'll throw one of those in there People who don't do any shorter, harder efforts in base 5, in their base training, usually fall behind. You want some in there. So I build it right in. Now, one of the questions I got was, in previous webinars, I've said short, do the short week 1, medium week 2, long week 3. And I actually referred to that up here, if you noticed. That was what I originally said. This is where I've morphed my methodology to. So usually I used to split them all 1 week, 1 week, 1 week, but that also kind of made the athlete think every week there was some test. And I also found that the medium test, they just perform better early in week 2. Then somewhere, and it doesn't have to be in the rest week, I'm going to actually show you once we get up and really rolling some options in a minute. But then I usually do my long test in the next 4-week cycle. So now in every 4-week cycle, based off the rest week, I'm doing my short and medium, and you can even, maybe the athlete's only training 7 hours a week, right? So they only rest for maybe, they don't need that much of a rest week. You can knock both test outs in this week. That's why it's so hard, right, to show you guys. There's so many variations. And that's why it's like I'm trying to give you the ideal and let you apply it to your situation. But then 8 weeks in, I'm doing the same, but now it's my long test. And then what happens, and in hindsight, I should have put these on the same slide, right? Then we progress. The 8 weeks are over. I should have stretched all these out in one slide. That would have been smart. Now I go into week 9, 10, 11, 12, right? So I've got my first 2 cycles out of the way. I've done a medium test 4 weeks ago. I just completed the long test. Next cycle, now I'm doing that medium test. Now I'm doing short and medium again. Now, going back to James, your point, and this is exactly what I was going to point out, don't be a slave. Don't design the training to fit the testing, right? Design the testing to fit the training, meaning, yeah, I showed you here's probably my best practice, but any time in here kind of works well, and you can stretch between 8 to 10 weeks. Like if I did the short test here, and for some reason athlete was traveling, race season does this to me all the time. I pretty much stopped testing with my athletes in race season because they race a lot, but try to target the same, that's good. Being close to the same, that's still pretty good. By the time you drift off, like, man, I'm taking that sprint test into the 2nd week of the 4th cycle, and that's not so good, right? Not so good. So the reality is, and then the same here for the long test. Because what happens, look what happens if you do your long test early and these late, you start kind of circulating them all in the same time. So every rest break, it's either short and long, next rest break, I'm sorry, short and medium, next rest break, long. Next rest break, short and medium, next rest break, long. So every 8 weeks. Now, the distance and the time of those tests, I'm just showing you the timing to do the test. How do I know what durations? I use the current normalized residuals, right? So if I'm doing this short and medium test, it's like, oh, it's short test day. I would go to the normalized residuals. Short test is 30 seconds. I need to exceed 680. If anybody can read that, you get $1. 690 watts, whatever the heck it says, right? So I'm using my normalized residuals to determine length and the target to be exceeded, to attempt to exceed. And that is the target. So I would do this on Friday as I was coming back, and maybe this on the Tuesday of the first work week. What's my medium? 1:33 max, and I'm trying to get over 438 watts. Okay, hopefully I've answered that question. So that schedule, right, what I would recommend you do, and this is something I do because, my learning sense, Kathy, my wife, calls me a grinder, right? Like I'm one of those people, like once I want to figure something out, I just, and figure out how it applies to my process, I'll just spend a lot of time. And I tend to be very iterative in my learning, like this, and then this would be better, and this would be better yet, and this would be better yet. Write your testing schedule up. How many people here do an annual training plan for your athlete, right? In your annual training plan, think about the timing of your unstructured testing. Obviously, you don't know how long they'll be, but you just think short, medium, long. short, medium, long. Build the testing into your annual thinking so that part doesn't, right? Doesn't take you off or start you chasing too much testing to chase the perfect model. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, every once in a while, you end up in a scenario where you've got a really big normalized residual. Something's throwing off your whole model and you know it. So every once in a while, no, there'll be some key dates where you have a reason. There'll be a key, and I didn't know how to put it here, right? Try not to do it once more than every other 8 week, within every 8-week cycle. If you're chasing more than one really offset normalized residual every 8 weeks, something's going on with you or your athlete, because that means the other tests aren't playing out right. You understand what I mean by that? It's like, man, if I'm doing short, medium, and long, really in a 5-week kind of period here, that should be maintaining my model pretty well. If I still have a pretty choppy model with big normalized residuals, I might be failing at a test. I just can't find a way to make 90 seconds worth of power. Maybe mentally, I just hate it so bad I don't do it. But the model isn't going to be able to fix that, right? You as the coach have to try. But yet, there are the times where it just does happen, because like it happens to me all the time with one of my athletes, a well-known time trialist. She goes out and drills a time trial. She races at 35. Most of the women's time trials are in the mid 30s, early 40-minute kind of time range. So they do that, and then there's a big drop off right after, right? Because they're not going to be, because that's for them, that's for, typical pro time trialist is 10 watts probably over threshold out that long. So the reality is, if not more, the reality is there's that big drop off. So then at times I might go clean that up, but those are decisions you have to make as a coach. So I say you have one other key test you can blend in the 8-week cycle. If you need more than one other key test, or fix it test might have been a better word, right? Something's going wrong with your athlete's ability to generate maximal efforts. Either they're not really doing the tests, or you're not making them do the test or scheduling the test, but something's wrong. So if you need more than that, something's not right. You should have no need to test more than 4 total tests every 8 weeks. These simpler unstructured tests are easy to build into training and execute. So that information alone, is meaning they're failing, or if you see a bunch of normalized residuals, something is going wrong with that. There was a really good time trialist, road racer, who just upgraded to WQ5 and said, look, my model changed. And actually, if you really look close, their MMP changed. And they just have a lot of weird data right now. Just a monster watt generator doing 20K time trials. Do the timing and understand the drop off that athlete is creating. So that, remember, because I'm getting this question a couple of times, and obviously I'm not doing a good job. Short, medium, and long test, right? So you want in every 8 weeks, 1 short, 1 medium, 1 long. I'm showing you a way to do it by building it around your rest weeks. You can do it how you want. The targeting of those tests are done by looking at your normalized residuals. You want to target the lowest point in the dotted blue line. Or you can actually just read the graph below, which tells you. So if you're going to go out and do a short test and you're 133, Robert, so this is your question, I'm just doing 1 maximal effort. That's my test. Now, if you want to give that athlete, or you yourself are like, well, I'm going to turn that into an anaerobic capacity day to give it a name. I'm going to do my 1 test. I'm going to recover for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to do 5 90-second intervals. That's cool if that's a way that works for you. But that test, you want 1 single maximal effort. 1 single, and 1 minute and 33 seconds for the medium. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 33 seconds, 27 minutes and 43 seconds. Okay, cool. So there's also another pretty good chart. Maybe we can make this more prominent. It's called Best Times for Informal Testing. It actually shows what's impacting your model and where your short, medium, and long are. And it will match the same boxes I just showed you here. It's a different way of looking at it, but it also will give you insight into when workouts that are impacting your model are going to drop off the backside. You know, it's a 90, the model is good for 90 days. So the reality is, you know, when is something going to drop off that my model is going to change? Because your model doesn't always change because new data comes in, right? Sometimes it changes because something drops off the backside. So you might want to add this. It's not in the default set, but it's in your chart library, best times for informal testing. It's a good chart to look at. You can see the data here. All right, I'm back to Q&A. Great. And you guys can ask questions on that in the Facebook group after if I didn't explain that well enough. And remember, that's my process. You can find your own. I found that one works pretty well because the athlete tends to do the best in that timing range, but what works for you? So another question I got, I thought it was a good question, right? Why is maintaining the model so important? And the answer to that, and this is the last question I have off the list, I think I've kind of gotten them all, except I want to talk about this one a little bit when I'm done. Why is maintaining the model so important? I think that's a really good question, right? It's funny, you know, I do it myself. You think you're such a smart ass, and it's like, oh God, I'm gonna put this out and people are gonna give me questions and I'm gonna know all the answers, right? And it's like, man, you read the questions and you're like, you know, our group is so smart, the Facebook group, so many people who really know what they're doing. You get great pushback, great questions. And I'm like, you know, that's easy. And then you sit down and you start thinking about me explaining to you, a broad audience, and you know, it wasn't as easy as I thought. So I really had to pull back and say, well, why is it important to me, right? Because the whole vision of this was, you know, the whole utilization in the model. Andy designed the model and we as a team did the math and made it work, right? But it didn't originally have outputs like eye levels and optimized intervals and some of the analytics you see, because Andy just wanted the, not for a negative way, but Andy wanted to make it very physiologically accurate, and that was his vision and goal. I wanted to make it a tool for prescription training. And him and I very politely pushed back and forth on each other for about a year. And I mean that like, it was so funny. It was like, he would say, prove it. And I would have to go out and do all these crazy hard workouts and prove it. And it was like, so over time, we ended up coming up with methods and systems of using it for prescription and deeper analytics. And it was really very healthy because you know, he's a mentor for me. I've learned a tremendous amount from him physiologically. And for me, just pushing on it really made me focus my thinking on what I wanted for coaches, not just for exercise physiologists. So when I think about what's important, right, and I try to put it in some order, I have to honestly say it is the targeting that I want to keep accurate. I maintain the model at all times under that process, right? Baseline testing, one short, medium, or long test every 8 weeks in a reasonably timed schedule. I always make sure the athlete's in generally the same environment in that test, as well rested, no other, not like changed altitudes or something like that, which is a problem when you have athletes that travel all over the world. So I make sure it's accurate, right? Then I never think twice about my targeting systems. I trust eye levels. I trust optimized intervals. I trust my own systems based off the power duration curve. I don't second guess. And then at first you'd be like, well, Tim, that's not that big of a deal. What happens when the athlete starts missing? What do you do? If you're not sure about your target, you spend a lot of time second guessing. If you know your targets and suddenly the athlete misses for a day or two and they're saying, no, coach, I'm not too tired. I want to get out there and ride. I can do this, right? You know, and athletes will do that. You know what's going on, right? You're not guessing, well, maybe I'm over targeting. Maybe they should be out there, right? And you make good decisions based off, and that tends to show up in all the resulting analytics too. But right there, to me, I don't think about targeting. I apply targeting to workouts with confidence. When the athlete doesn't hit targeting, it immediately makes me explore why they didn't hit the targeting, not, oh crap, was the targeting wrong? That really is a high value once you get to trust the system. So second one, understanding performance. And this is something I'm back to preaching on, and this is like back to a little preachy webinar, so you guys can hang up on me whenever you want. Don't have a training plan. Coaches, self-coached athletes on this call and don't have a training plan, that doesn't mean you can't follow a plan. And even for athletes who buy a plan or get a plan from a coach or whatever, that's not quite what I mean. It's not that black or white, but it is, right? The problem when you write a plan, it's like, oh, here's my 12-week plan. Here's my entire build plan. I'm going to write out my athlete's full season plan. You lock into X's and O's. You lock into, today is this. You so micro compartmentalize everything. It's one tree, one tree, one tree, when you really, really have to look at the forest. I've given the music explanation, right? It doesn't, by not thinking strategy versus plan, you don't make great music. You don't look at that forest. I don't want to give that analogy again, but it's out there in one of my last webinars. So the reality is, the second reason maintaining the model is so important is I see micro changes in fitness and failure to achieve expected targeting on fitness. And then, and this is where it's so important, I have access to excellent analytic tools to give me deeper insight into what is going right and what is going wrong. That's what we call actionable intelligence. And then I can constantly tweak my training strategy, flow those strategy tweaks into my plan by editing my plan, what the athlete's doing in more real time, to better improve the training for the athlete and therefore the results. I'm constantly doing that cycle, and I train my athletes to go with it. I mean, I have to say, I'll give her credit, like Amber Neben, hardest working athlete I've ever had, disciplined, never misses, a watt, totally committed to training, but also a master's degree in biochemical chemistry, super smart, gets it. And we have fine-tuned a strategy approach that we're constantly ebbing and flowing, and she's already on the Olympic long team. I don't think that's public, but the reality is she was on last year's. She was already made it because she's the national champ at 45 years old. And she's so honed to work with me in feedback and analytics that we have a strategy. We rarely ever write more than 2 weeks of training at a time, even though, don't get me wrong, we know what we're doing every cycle. And we have a general idea of what that training is going to be, but we're constantly adapting by what's happening in micro changes in her fitness, what's happening in the training environment she's in, all of these things. So having a robust model underneath at all times really adds my ability to stay, to implement that big strategy with tweaks to the plan to get the best result. And finally, the physiological metrics to understand the cost of improvements. I just answered this question today. Somebody was asking me about a mountain bike race, 40 minutes on, 40 minutes off. The flaw I see creeping back up, and I see a lot of these questions again now. Why do you want the model to be right? Because the model will show me, like, wow, man, that person, they really probably would be best. I didn't have enough information to answer it with detail, but they're probably best suited to raise FTP. But if they do it in a way that really reduces their FRC, they're going to struggle in a 40-minute mountain bike race. There's some higher power outputs needed. They're going to have to go harder, right? Because it's going to be full on for 40 minutes. So that would hurt them. So if that athlete starts training and FTP starts going up and that's all they're measuring, they're going to say, great, I'm getting more prepared to perform well at my event. But in the absence of the model, they might not see FRC is going down. They're losing anaerobic capacity which might, and actually, to be honest with you, probably would result in a slower lap time. So they think they're improving, so they don't change their strategy because they don't see the cost benefit of the decisions they make. Therefore, they don't retweak the strategy. So when you're tweaking your strategy, you're not just tweaking it because something's working, there's a benefit occurring. You have to look at the cost of the benefit. You have to look at what's not working. So I think that's why it's so important. And it's funny, I've become once you maintain the model in a good, clean, simple system, you don't think about the model as the problem. And don't get me wrong, is DFRC perfect? Because I use it as an example. No, it's a lot better than some people will show. So many times it's because the athlete hasn't tested, they're not maintaining the model or whatever, and then they want DFRC to work. There's a price for having all of those metrics working, and that's called maintain your model. But if you think about it, go back to this, the price is 3 tests, you know, you're 3 tests every 8 weeks, if you think about it as a rolling 8 weeks. It's not that high of a price to get all of that benefit. All right, I'm done preaching. I'm going to open up to Q&A. Hopefully that was at least provoked some good questions. Does the model apply with running with power as well? And is there any difference in the testing? So it's great because I see Steve Palladino on this. I would really look, sorry, Steve, if I'm going to set you up here, Google search or on Facebook, look for Palladino Power Project. Look for Steve Palladino's group. He is the leader and smartest guy I know in running with power. He's doing some crazy cool stuff that we want to work with him more in WKO5 on. I would absolutely look up his. It's not, the model when it comes to running is not the same, but yet it is. If you understand the tool and the things that you need to do to apply it well, it can be an effective tool and highly utilized. But that being said, running doesn't have the efficiency of cycling. Some of the testing and the way you go about it is slightly different. But I would just look for the Palladino Power Project. He's got a great group he monitors of runners and power people, and you learn a lot from them. And I'm not totally ducking it either. I used to run. Running was my thing in college. The day I left college, I've never run again, and I wouldn't do it now unless somebody was chasing me. So I just don't have the expertise. And like Steve commented in here, testing model is essentially the same. Your talk is nearly perfectly transferable. All right, other open questions. I mean, I know I took a lot of questions as we went, but now is your chance. You have 90 seconds to submit them, and I'm going to cut off the webinar and go ride my bike. Cool, I think we got them all. Hopefully that's a good little refresher and a little bit deeper. Feel free to ask additional questions in the Facebook group if you have them. Talk to everybody soon. Thanks.